Welcome to the third screencast of Thinking Text. And this time I want to introduce you to the basic screen editing features of Thinking Text. And therefore I have loaded my sample project from the last tutorial where we built a 2-column layout and added some dummy content, and now I switch to the screen layout section where I can edit the CSS files. And here on the right you find the CSS rules dialog with all the style sheets that are included in my layout, and recently the screen CSS is shown with all its defined selectors. Now I want to start editing my layout. And to do this there are two ways. The first way is to activate any of the available selectors within the CSS rules dialog, and as soon as I activate any selector, below the dialog the Css Properties dialog becomes enabled, and there I can set some typical CSS properties for typography, colors and backgrounds, element dimensions and paddings and margins, and as well some typical properties for positioning. And as you can see here, for the nav selector I have already set a min width property, and that's why the dimensions tab is highlighted. So you can always see in which tab there are already some properties defined. Now let's come to the second way to choose the right selector for editing, and this is the way that I think you will use much more when working with the application. And this is just to click on any element within your layout. And as you can see here in the CSS rules dialog, the view of this dialog changes when I activate an element in my layout, and the CSS rules dialog now shows every matching CSS rule from all active style sheets. And as you can see here, the HTML star selector, and here is my paragraph selector, and now I click on it and can choose typography, and there is already a line height defined, and I can modify it to 1.8 EM, and it's immediately live in my layout. And as you can see here, there's already a margin defined. Now I want to edit my screen layout, and therefore I'm switching to the structure view mode because it's much easier here to select the structural elements of my layout. And at first I want to add some horizontal white space to my content so that it don't touches the edges of the browser window on small screen sizes. And second, I want to adjust the vertical alignment of my content to the first item of this horizontal menu. Both of my wishes can be realized by adding a horizontal padding to the YMVBox container. And here we already have a selector for this container, and that's why I can go to the CSS Properties dialog and add a surrounding padding of 20 pixels. And so take a look at the layout now. With this padding I reached both goals, and this looks fine now. Now I want to style the heading here a little bit, and I'm clicking on it, and I can see there are already some selectors that hitting this element, such as this selector for all headings, and here's defined my font family, and I don't like this very much, that's why I changed it to Helvetica and Arial and sans serif. Oh, okay. And now only for my first heading I want to set it bold. I can do this here. And second, I will switch the font variant to small caps. And now I can edit my heading, and this is now my first website. And that's all. So these are the basic CSS editing features of Thinkin text, and they were built in to allow quick access and quick changes when prototyping. And for complex CSS layout you need, of course, much more, and therefore there's a DOM and CSS Inspector. And as you can see here on the left side, you have a complete DOM tree with every element, and of course these elements are selectable, so I can click on them. And on the right side you see all the matching CSS properties in the order of specification with their defined or inherited CSS properties. There would be a lot to say about all the features of the CSS Inspector. That's why we made a separate screencast for it. And instead I want to show you here another unique feature of Thinkin text. I used the YAML CSS framework for this project, and in the second tutorial I created this screen layout by dropping the different layout modules into the body element. And here is the full page block with the YM wrapper element and its parent that spans over the entire width. And in the main content area we have a grid module that separates the content area in two columns, the content column and the sidebar. One of the cool things of Thinkin text is that it not only lets you drop these complex layout modules into your web page to create your layout quickly, but it actually knows how they work. So when you use a grid, for example, then it actually knows that these grid columns are floated, and that's why Thinkin text can help to avoid problems between your CSS styles and the styles of the framework you are using. To show you how Thinkin text supports me when I create my design, let's go back to my web page. And here again we have the full page blocks that I dropped into my layout with the class YM wrapper that holds the overall layout width, and here's my grid columns. And now I will click on the YM wrapper and choose the YM wrapper selector, and now you can see in the CSS Properties dialog that there are several CSS properties defined. Here's the maximum width, and as well as the margin that defines the horizontal alignment of the layout. And as you can see, all these properties are locked. That means that the application has reserved these properties for the CSS framework. In the case of the YM wrapper selector of the full page module from the YAML CSS framework, Thinkin text reserves these CSS properties because the application offers you, with this dialog, the YAML layout properties, the possibility to set up the alignment of your layout as well as your layout width, min width and max width by using these input fields. So it's up to Thinkin text to define the correct CSS properties to the correct selectors and make it easier to you as the user to modify your layout, and the application is aware of the correct usage of the framework here. This kind of protection layer for the layout elements of your CSS framework within Thinkin text does not mean that you are not allowed to modify these elements or to modify their CSS properties. To modify these styles, you only have to go to the CSS Inspector that I already showed you in the beginning of the screencast. On the left you have the DOM tree where you can click on any element, And on the right, here you have all the defined CSS properties for the YM wrapper selector, and here you can click on the values, and as you can see I can edit them, while when using the CSS Properties dialog here they are disabled, just to let you know that with a quick edit of these properties you could harm the functionality of the framework. So far I have shown you how to choose a selector from your style sheets to modify its properties or to define new ones, and now I want to show you how to create new selectors to extend your style sheets and to modify your layout to your wishes. Okay, now I want to show you how this works, and therefore I want to style my sidebar, and I click on this content column, and here in the element properties I add the class sidebar, and as you can see, as soon as I hit enter, the class will be added to the DOM element, and now I can create a new selector in the CSS rules dialog that you can find on any of these sections: the screen layout, typography and print. And when I move between these sections, you can see that the active style sheet switches from screen CSS to typography and print CSS. So you should always go to the section where you want your new selector to be created. And now I'm in screen layout, and therefore I can now click on new CSS selector and type sidebar. On the right there is a select box to choose the scope of the new selector, and here you can define the media type where your selector is available. You can choose between screen, print and all, and we use screen here. Our container is still active, that's why the new selector immediately appears in the list of the matched rules. And now let's quickly define a background here. So click on background and choose a red color. Ready. So this is really easy, isn't it? And to show you another feature here and within Thinkin text, let's quickly remove the CSS class sidebar from the DOM element again. And now it's gone, and let's quickly deselect my element. And now when there's no active element in the layout, you can see all the CSS selectors in your screen CSS in the CSS rules dialog. And as you can see here, the new sidebar selector is now gray. And this means this is an unused selector that you can immediately delete from your style sheet because it doesn't affect your layout anymore. And if you have more of these selectors in your style sheet, just use the cleanup button here to remove all of them with a single click. I'm using the delete icon here, and with this click I'm at the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching and have much fun with Thinkin text. Bye bye.